Dinah here with Foundations in Torah, a little under the weather. But nonetheless, we're going to look at Vayishlach, and we're going to actually focus on Revelation. But in order to do that, I've got to go back to one particular story in that Torah portion dealing with none other than Dinah. Now, her story is sandwiched in between two events in Jacob's life. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but you'll recall he crossed over, he wrestled with the angel, and he brought his whole family to Shechem, and in Shechem he built an altar. So we leave off there, and then we have Dinah in there, and then the Dinah concludes with, or starts the next chapter with Jacob cleansing all the family with all the idols and heading up to Jerusalem again, likely to Bethel, the house of God. So he has these two moments in which he builds an altar, one in Shechem, one at Bethel, and then in the middle he has a major character failure. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, what's important to understand is in the world of the ancient Near East, the idea of the man being responsible to protect the sexual purity of the women in his household was paramount. There was probably nothing more important than that. And this is in the ancient Hebrew culture. So that was his main responsibility, was to protect and secure the sexual purity of the women. His honor, his prestige, his status absolutely depended on that. And his honor would rise or fall based on his ability to protect the women. Clearly, Jacob failed in this regard. If he was not successful, he was shamed. If he was successful, he was honored. It would appear in this story that Jacob's only concern was whether the Shechemites or the Canaanites or whomever were going to retaliate against him. He wasn't even concerned, it doesn't appear, for the honor of Dinah, and that Shimon and Levi did exactly what they were supposed to do and took the sword and slaughtered all of the Shechemites. So if a woman was disgraced, it meant her husband or her father had completely failed to protect her. And so Dinah's rape was rectified then by, again, Shimon and Levi. This attack showed Jacob's response to be one of poor judgment and clearly ineffective in protecting his women. Now, Dinah, of course, is the seventh in line of the whole house of Israel here. She was 7 out of 13, the only female born of the bunch, and she was born in particular to Leah. So the seventh has much to do with temple language. In fact, anytime you have a temple being built, dedicated, the king enthroned, rest, all that sort of thing, it was usually associated with the number 7. The house building dynasty had to do with the number 7. So in the ancient world, sons would build the house, but it was the daughters that were called the house. So this is important when we get to the story of Dinah. Now, one of the places we have the description of this story, one of the very, very few, is in the book of Judith, which is in the Apocryphal. And Judith, in particular, chapter 9, I would encourage you to read that particular chapter. But it is a picture of virgin Israel, if you will, being raped and avenged in the same way that Shimon and Levi acted in that regard. The idea in Judith is this description of Israel being persecuted, and this is the perspective of the story of Dinah. It says, a sword to take vengeance on the strangers, or the goyim, who tore off the virgin's clothing, and to defile her, expose her thighs, put her to shame, pollute her womb in disgrace. So this is what's discussed in that particular chapter. So the crisis in the persecution, the oppression, and was basically tagged to the Seleucid kingdom, the Seleucid era. So the story in Judith, which is the story of Dinah, is a commentary on Jerusalem, the temple, the city, and its relationship to the foreigners around him. And we see it done in feminine terms, metaphorical language, dealing with the female. And this again plays into this whole concept of the honor shame, that the husband and father was responsible for the women in his house. So Jerusalem, Zion, the temple, Israel, all kind of synonymous terms, viewed in the scriptures and in the ancient world in terms of mother, daughter, virgin, sister, bride, wife, widow, etc. This feminine imagery is rhetorical device used by the prophets. You're going to find Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, etc., using Jerusalem and the temple described in that way. So there are many stories in the Bible about fidelity or infidelity, all dealing with Israel's conduct in relationship to the nations around her. Again, in the ancient Near East literature, capital cities were always feminine, and we see the use of these feminine proverbs. So the idea of harlotry was imagery that was basically focused in on the leadership, the rulership. It was intended when Israel acted in a way of harlotry, it was intended to shame the religious leaders and motivate them to bring about reform. Clearly, in the story of Jacob, it did motivate him, because we see afterwards he cleaned out his household of the idols, buried them in Shechem, and then went up to Beit El to honor and worship God by building an altar. So Dinah, in the book of Judith, speaking of the sexual violence against her, was equivalent to the violation of Jerusalem or the temple by foreign rulers. And again, the context there is the Seleucids. She is dealing with Judith herself, and she didn't write the book. We don't actually know who wrote the book of Judith. We think it's somewhere in the second century BCE, probably written in Hebrew. But the enemy is depicted in this as being very prideful. It's described in its military prowess. And the idea of the enemy was to come in and defile and destroy the temple. We see that happening with the Babylonians and the Assyrians. The chapter creates in it a sympathy and a compassion for Jerusalem, and it is said to be a reminder to God that He is responsible to protect and defend the virgin city again. Now, the handsome Shechem likely is the same description we have in Ezekiel 23. Read that chapter, very graphic chapter about the two women, Oholah, Oholivah, Oholah, represented Samaria. They were both harlots. And the idea of the nations looking very appealing from the distance, that the foreign nations look attractive, but once you see what they do, their intent and purpose was to defile the house. So Oholah says she lusted after her lovers, the Assyrians. They were warriors dressed in blue, governors and rulers, good-looking men on horseback, and so it was very attractive to her. So let's jump ahead now and kind of close this out with Revelation 18. So the judgment of the great whore of Babylon, sitting on many waters, this is temple language. The many waters represents chaos, so we have the harlot sitting on chaos. So the harlot temple is creating chaos. And the kings of the earth are going whoring after her, and the people getting drunk on the wine or whoring, all that sort of thing. And the woman, the harlot, is dressed in purple and scarlet and glittering with gold and precious stones. So this is a description of the high priest. So the high priest in the Second Temple period in particular, and even leading up to that, has joined in allegiance with Rome, and has basically his actions have made the temple defiled. She is as a prostitute because the high priest has joined himself in an unholy alliance with Rome itself, foreign rulers once again, and caused this situation. Now, in the case of Jacob, it appears that he has repented, because his role is actually high priest. So it appears he has repented and returned and restored the family by getting rid of the idols, and then, of course, again, rebuilding the altar in Beit El. Now, in Revelation 21, it's described as seeing the holy city coming down, the New Jerusalem, from heaven, and God prepared her like a bride, beautifully adorned, dressed for her husband. And clearly honor coming to God, and his rightful place is to protect and defend. In Ephesians chapter 5, you can read in there verses 26 through 28, but now we see the Messiah described in the same terms as he who himself, the one who keeps the body safe, the one who keeps the community safe, who protects and defends the community's honor. And so it is the Messiah's role to bring honor to Israel and to present her as a pure bride. That was the role of the man in the ancient Near East world, to protect the honor of the women that were in the tent. So hopefully that helps make a little more sense of the story of Dinah. It is an allegory, it's filled with symbolism. We have to be very careful about taking it completely literal. Yes, the players are literal, but the story describes the spiritual condition of the community of Israel, and speaking in particular of Jacob's response as high priest, and then ultimately it appears that he has restored things. So thanks for joining me. See you next time. Shalom.